The title of my sermon is taken from Henry David Thoreau. I didn't know he would be on the cover, by the way. So the sermon starts with me explaining the cover. He's one of Unitarian Universalism's most famous apostates, if we can be said to have people like that. He left his church, his Unitarian church, to follow his own path and define his own spirituality, which is probably a whole sermon all by itself. Anyway, the quote is, "Be not simply good, be good for something." I don't want to give the whole sermon away, but that quote is pretty fundamental to what I believe. I did a lot of research into how people approach this sermon, this type of sermon. It's actually a common theme in many Unitarian Universalist congregations. Mostly, to me, it seems like a kind of hagiography, a religious biography. Not a saint's biography, of course, but there really aren't any other good terms for this, so this is what I'm calling it. And I really like this approach because, one, who doesn't like to talk about themselves? And two, I've had a pretty rambling course of religious touch points in my own life, and I think they all really shaped the beliefs I have now. And I'm only in my 40s, so I probably have a lot more touch points left to learn about what I believe. But when I look back, I know there were some key events. And I am a historian by training, so I always do my sermons like history lessons. I'm sorry in advance, that is always the way that these work. I wasn't really born with any belief system attached. I was never baptized. I never went to church except for funerals and weddings. In my hometown in the 1980s, that was pretty unheard of. I tell people now that I am ethnically Methodist because that's what both sides of my family are, going back a pretty good ways, although great-grandma Clara was a Seventh-day Adventist, and I heard we had some Quakers back there. Two branches of my family came on the Mayflower and the ship right after, which was called the Fortune. So I have a history of radical religious belief ingrained in me. My family has been in the U.S. since before it was the U.S., so there was a lot of room for beliefs to change and adapt as we went west from Massachusetts and Virginia. Anyway, being from a Methodist family, even if I did not go to church, I know how to sing in 4-part harmony. I know what you take to a church potluck. And I know how important it is to volunteer your time. This is a very Methodist tenet. Service is really part of my family and my original small town community in ways that you really can't divorce from each other. Small towns are a lot like our fellowship. They require people to give freely of their time and their care in order to survive and to thrive. So I'm going to stop for 1 second. I'm going to tell you about my hometown. Redfield, Iowa is 40 miles west of Des Moines. It was founded by one of my ancestors in 1846. It has around 850 people, and I grew up knowing most of them and being related to half of them. My grandma was the postmaster, so I really knew everyone. There were 4 churches in town. There was a Kingdom Hall of the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Methodist Church, a UCC church, and then one non-denominational Christian church that I think we would call evangelical today. It was inside a refurbished chicken hatchery, but it was actually pretty nice. If you're not from Iowa, you might not know this. Almost every town is identified with some kind of identity historically. Catholic, Methodist, German, Swedish, Lutheran. Towns were built by people who shared something, and that's how they grew up. The Methodist church was the biggest church in my town, but everyone went to church somewhere, except my mom and dad. I have a few stories that intersect with religion when I was very young. The first, when I was 5, and a girl from my kindergarten class, Zara Beth, who became my best friend, by the way, told me I was going to hell because I didn't go to her church. She was Jehovah's Witness. We had a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses in our town and a very large Kingdom Hall along the main street. We had a winter concert like 30 years before everyone else because there were no holidays celebrated. Anyway, Zarabeth's insult was such a 5-year-old's understanding of religion, right? She's like, you're going to hell. You don't go to my church. And I laugh about it now, but at the time I was so mad at her. I responded to tell her that God loves everybody, so I was definitely going to heaven, and it didn't matter where I went to church. I actually still believe this. If God exists and is as great as everyone says, I cannot imagine they would throw me into punishment for something as silly as walking into the wrong building or not being sure they existed. In fact, I feel like a good life might count for more because I didn't do it out of a fear of hell. But I digress. Zarabeth incidentally left the church in her 20s along with a lot of the people I went to school with. The Kingdom Hall in my hometown is now a very nice quilting store and sewing school. Oh wait, hold on, I don't change the page yet. So when I was 9, because my mom and my dad and my brother never went to church, and everyone else definitely did go to church, I asked my mom what we were. Well, your father's a Methodist, and I'm an existentialist, was her answer. She then sort of vaguely explained that she believed more in the power of the natural world than she did a God, and that was it. I still laugh about this conversation because I was 9 and had no idea what she was talking about. But it did open my eyes to the idea that you could believe very deeply in something that's not God, a force that has nothing to do with the divine. I still believe in this. I think nature, I think the universe has so much raw power, so much beauty. I really don't need a lot more to stand in awe of. Like I said, in Iowa, most people are something. They identify Dutch Reform, German Lutheran, Irish Catholic, something. I never was. And in high school, I learned about atheism, and I really became something, like wholeheartedly. First of all, it was pretty shocking to everyone, which I really liked. Second of all, it was true. I didn't believe in God, and it seemed silly. I knew now I learned there was a term for that person. I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't understand. I didn't even know how you prayed. I didn't understand how that worked. I had never been taught how that worked. I didn't feel the presence of the divine. Atheism felt very natural, felt very right to me. Not to say I was ignorant of religion. I really love history. I always thought the Bible was sort of semi-historical, and I really like the stories. They're amazing. And my whole family are Freemasons, or Order of the Eastern Star, which is the women's auxiliary, I guess. And the stories of the people in the Old Testament are used heavily by these groups to define the mission, to find the work that they do. The story of Esther is particularly powerful, and I remember learning it when I was like 10 from my grandma, and I loved it. I loved that she fought and helped her people. It was like a female-centric story. I really loved that, and so I have a lot of experience with the Bible. But I never saw God in any of those stories, and when I heard about atheism, I felt so validated. I really felt part of a group that agreed with me, and that had never happened to me before. So I was lightly harassed throughout high school because I didn't believe in God. The Christian kids, I have to stop for a second. In Iowa, Christian kids are Protestant, and if you're Catholic, you're Catholic. But yeah, that's how it goes. So the Christian kids would just not leave me alone. They would not leave me alone. A girl named Joni came up to me one time crying, actual tears coming down her face, when she heard that I was atheist from someone. "I can't stand the thought of you going to hell," she told me tearfully. It was really embarrassing. I had never given any thought to hell. I don't believe in it. But here she was, crying over my soul backstage at the musical practice. It was a lot. It was a lot. Another boy named Kevin told me that I should believe because then it covers all your bases. Like, if God doesn't exist and you believe anyway, no harm done. I told Kevin that was the worst reason to believe in God I ever heard of. The only kids who did not give me a hard time were the Catholics, so I hung out with them all the time. They never tried to convert anyone or explain anything, even when they came to school with ashes on their foreheads and only ate fish on Fridays. There was this real calm, kind of assured sense of belief. They never brought it to me. They never asked me to feel it with them. I really liked that. I liked that space that they held. But around this time, I got really interested in theological history, mostly because of that Christian Catholic thing that everybody was doing, saying Catholics weren't Christians. The Christian kids, I once saw a kid from a Baptist church tell a Catholic student they weren't Christian, like to their face. They didn't know where they came from. They had no conception of what was happening in their religious history. And I studied a lot of Christian history after that. I found it really, really interesting. I read biographies of John Calvin, Hildegard of Bingen. I studied it in college. I took early modern history classes. I actually studied it in Belgium. I studied abroad at the Catholic University in Leuven. And living in Belgium, you're so close to that European border between Catholicism and Protestantism. You know, besides the cathedrals and the monasteries, we visited a bagonage, which I had never heard of before. But a bagonage was like a convent. It was a community for women, but it was entirely secular. And it was during times of wars or after wars when men were gone or had been killed in the wars, women would live together with their children in these places of security. They were faithful, but it didn't define their community. And I think Belgium was a really interesting place for that to happen, right? Because there was so much fighting. In that line between the Netherlands and Belgium is a very strict Protestant Catholic kind of line. And people were building communities where they said, we don't want to care about that. We just want to live together and be together. I found that a very powerful message when I was there. Belgium has a lot of scars from those wars, all the religious wars. It was created specifically to separate itself from Protestantism. I really found it very fascinating there because I still didn't really understand belief. I was very outside of it. I didn't have the slightest idea how anybody believed in God. And I think I studied it because I wanted to figure out what was going on. Like, there must be a key, something. I'm going to find that answer somewhere. But I did realize I kind of needed to give it up because I wasn't finding the answer. And that's actually become another belief of mine, which is that faith exists. It simply is. I don't need to understand it. The faith is there. I can respect the faith like my Catholic friends. It was just there. They didn't need me to understand it for it to exist. Now, after college and graduate school, I started working for the Holocaust Museum Houston, which became kind of an insider's view of Judaism. And up to that point, my only experience of Judaism was novels and history classes and the kids I knew at college who were Jewish. So I knew about Hanukkah, and I knew about matzo balls, and I knew about the Holocaust. Lot missing there, obviously. My time there, though, it really taught me sort of the beauty of religion, which I don't think I had ever really come upon before. Judaism really resists attempts to understand it or to puzzle it apart. It just exists. It's just there. The way they sing the Hebrew, the mantles for the Torah, Yom Kippur, an entire holiday that's based on atonement. There's a lot of humanity in that religion that I found very, very nice. The community that built the museum was very close-knit, so even without being Jewish, I really found myself inside the community because that was how the community worked. Many people were really embittered by the history that we were talking about, which makes sense, but others weren't, and I found that very surprising. I saw people who couldn't care less about keeping kosher, but were just the kindest, most giving people you've ever met. And I saw people who cared a lot about keeping kosher, but were really mean and petty. I mean, I think the experience really shows me that like their shared purpose of building something to remember just overrode all the other things that they might be against each other for, right? They had this shared purpose. And I think living in Houston has really opened me up more than anything else. Where I'm from, there was one Jewish family. There were 0 non-white people in Iowa when I was growing up. It was 97% white. And now in Houston, it's like I have friends who are Buddhist and Catholic and Muslim and Jewish and Hindu and non-practicing and pagan, and then the atheists, of course, transcendentalists. This town is really big. It's for everybody. My current boss is Shiite Muslim. He fled Iran in 1979, and we talk a lot about the different approaches to religion and being a good person. We agree that good people don't come from one religion or another. Goodness comes in all kinds of packages. So at some point, I started to consider myself an agnostic because I decided there was no way for me to know if God exists or if God does not exist. And it felt really irreverent to presume that there is not one. Many people I respect and love believe in God, and I don't have any more proof than they do about the existence of God. So I don't know. I decided instead to just believe the things I really think are true. Nature, the unseen force of faith, the inherent kindness of human beings. And then I read the principles of Unitarian Universalism, and I realized that somebody had helpfully written all of those things down that I had on my own list. So I kind of act like I didn't know about Unitarian Universalism until I was in my 30s, but that's not true. My best friend is a 3rd generation UU from Madison, Wisconsin. And she was the one who told me about UU in physics class in college. I don't know why we weren't listening to the professor, but I remember her telling me about UU. And she was telling me stories from religious instruction, like the religious education classes in Madison, which sounded totally different from any stories I had heard about Methodist Sunday school. Wild, just wild stories. And I was like, how odd, a religion without God. And then I just sort of forgot about it, like you just, oh, interesting. And then you go on your way. When our kids were little, so I have two kids, if you don't know that, we sent them to a Methodist day school that was near our house. And they went to chapel on Wednesdays, and I was culturally aligned to Methodism, right? The most important saying about Methodists, by the way, is they believe in deeds, not creeds. So I wasn't too concerned about them going to Methodist day school. I wanted them to at least learn to respect and understand how to go to church, because I never did. So my older daughter, she had books about the Greek gods and goddesses, and she started asking if we could go to church because she liked praying to Zeus sometimes, and she thought religion was really interesting. And I didn't want to tell her there is no Greek church for Zeus. You can't go there. But we can go somewhere else where if you want to pray to Zeus, you are welcome to do that. And I really couldn't imagine the kids going to real Sunday school. I couldn't imagine them sitting, and I couldn't imagine myself sitting through a real Christian service. It felt like a lie. Unitarian Universalism, this church without a God, really felt like it was something we could relate to. The 8 principles, there were only 7 back then, but there's 8 now. They kind of aligned with the way we tried to live as a family. And then my daughter started pre-K at School of the Woods, which is just down the street. And we learned it was started by the Fellowship in 1962. And I have realized that it is actually a Unitarian Universalist school, which is disguising itself as a Montessori school. Montessori schools do not have to emphasize self-governance, social justice, understanding, care for the earth, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. School of the Woods does that. That's always been part of the curriculum. So it really felt like our kids were ready to embrace those tenets because this church believes that, our family believes that. They were coming into a community that was the basis of it. The principles feel really comfortable to me. They feel really knowable to me, even as an agnostic. It gives me a sense of peace. I feel like my heart has a place to land here, where I can be good, and I can be good for something. There's a poem I really love, which is called To Be of Use by Marge Piercy. I'm just going to read you the last stanza, not the whole thing. The work of the world is common as mud, botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing well done has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphora for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums, but you know they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real. Over the years, I've met a lot of people who are devoutly religious, and to me, the ones who are most authentically devout are the people whose religiousness is really grounded in kindness and service. I've studied a lot of religious wars, plenty of people killing each other in God's name. So when I read about a person whose faith is based on a spirit of giving, it's like a gift itself. Like Jesus, even if I don't believe he is the Son of God, and I don't, just for full clarity, the fact that someone who lived 2,000 years ago and is still remembered and revered just for being so incredibly good is amazing. I mean, it's an amazing story. It's inspiring. So even if I don't have a God in the same way as faithful people, I do still want to live in a way that encourages other people to live that way, in a giving and caring way, having principles and living them better every day, working on making a better universe, even if I don't know for a fact that it might get better. There's no one way to make things better. Maybe it's volunteering to read to kids, maybe it's clearing trash from the side of the road, working for a nonprofit, telling your family you love them every single day. I think if you believe in improving the world through kindness and in the unseen forces that you can set in motion through your work, you will change things. That will happen. And hopefully that inspires other people to work towards the same goal. Like Thoreau said, be not just good, but be good for something. I hope we can all go out this week and be good for something. Thank you.